during the early Vedic age, these people called the Aryans came to the northwestern part of India from the Central Asia, and this portion was called Sapta Sindhu. Why was this region called the Sapta Sindhu region? Well, because it has 7 rivers: Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Bias, Satluj and Saraswati. Sapta means 7 and Sindhu means rivers. This is why it was called the Sapta Sindhu region. So after the Aryans came here, they found these great rivers and fertile soil. So they decided that they were going to settle here. Now let's see what happened next. Well, because they started agriculture and the domestication of animals, the population slowly increased, right? So what happened next? Well, they traveled to the southeastern portion, where they found thick, dense forest. So what do you think these people did next? So the brave Aryans had just discovered iron tools. Using such tools, they were able to cut down all the trees from that area and start living there or building their own houses there. So what was this place? This region right here is where the Aryans previously lived during the early Vedic period. But after their population grew, what happened? That they needed new places to settle down, right? So they decided to migrate southeast to this portion. And even though it was covered with dense forest, they were able to clear it out with their iron tools. So this area, as you can see, has Ganga and Yamuna river. So this is where the Aryans during the later Vedic period migrated to in search of new lands. This was called the Ganga Yamuna Doab, or later known as Aryavarta, or the abode of the Aryas. This is where the Aryans lived during the later Vedic period. So during the Vedic period, Aryans lived at the Aryavarta, whereas during the early Vedic period, the place that they lived was Brahmavarta, or the abode of gods, or where good people lived. So it will be interesting for you to know that even today, much of the food crops that we eat comes from this area, because this land was just so fertile. So imagine you have come back to the later Vedic age using your time machine. But this time you see that the Rajan looks much more strict towards its people. But you cannot even see the Gramini or the Senani anywhere. Well, this is because during the later Vedic age, the Rajan had become the supreme commander of his army. So he held all of the power. So because of this, what had happened? The people had no say in who their king or the Rajan was going to be, right? So people no longer had any say in who the king would be, because the Rajan was very powerful. Now, apart from this, do you remember the Sabha and Samitis? Well, these were the political organizations from that time in which all the important decisions were taken, and the Rajan was supposed to do whatever these Sabha and Samiti meetings decided, right? So what happened? That these Sabhas and Samiti meetings also lost their meaning. Why? Well, because these meetings were now dominated by the Brahmans and the princes. So the other classes of people had no longer any say in what was going to happen. But however, in the village regions, people could still decide because of the village legislatives. Apart from that, there was now compulsory Bali. Bali was basically a form of tax that we, the people of India, pay in modern day. So it was now compulsory. Previously, in the early Vedic time, what had happened is that the people, the villagers, used to give such Balis to the Rajan because they genuinely respected him and liked the fact that the Rajan took care of them, right? But during the later Vedic age, what had happened is that Bali was now compulsory. Not only that, in the early Vedic period, the Rajan was known as Gopati. This was so because he was concerned about cows. If you remember, in the early Vedic time, cows were very important. In fact, they were the symbol of power at that time and even a currency. But what happened in the later Vedic period? In the later Vedic period, the king became more concerned about land and thus was called Bhupati. So now land became the currency, right? Now, because land had become the currency, the king had to justify such a change to the people, right? Because these kings had direct lineages with gods. So the people will be really confused that why is the king not interested in cows anymore but interested in land? Well, because of that, the king now had to go through ritual services. And how will he do that alone, right? Now, because of this, the importance of Purohita, or the chief priest also increased. They became more important. And so the king had to conduct such rituals, and he could not conduct such rituals alone, and so the Purohit became important. Because of that, the Purohit now gets gifts from Rajans, lavish gifts and riches for the services. Now, during such political changes, even the lives of commoners must have changed, right? Well, this happened after the discovery of iron or shamayas or black metal. Well, agriculture was still the most important occupation of that day and age, but what had happened that because of the discovery of iron, the whole occupation became more profitable. Iron tools used to clear out forests for agricultural feasts. If you remember, the Aryans had found out great fertile lands, but they were covered with trees, which they cut down using these iron tools. Right? Apart from that, these tools were also made, which are iron ploughs, iron tipped ploughs, because this is the tip of the plough and it is made of iron. Previously, it was not made of iron, so it was not as stern or useful as this one. But now iron tipped ploughs were more efficient than wooden ploughs, and so farming improved. Apart from that, iron sickles were also made, which made harvesting crops much more easier. But that's not all. Because of iron, fighting wars also became easier. You must remember that the Aryans used to get into fights regarding cows in the early Vedic age. Then during the later Vedic age, they got into wars because of land, right? So if you were a soldier in that day and age, you'd be really happy because new iron weapons made fighting battles much more easier. Apart from that, what had happened that many new tools were also made using this iron, right? So because of these tools, crafts like chariot making, leather works, and carpentry and jewelry making also improved. Take a look at the picture. Even here you can see such iron tools are being used by the carpenter to cut the wood, right? So we can understand truly how good iron tools were. Even here you can see the leatherman cutting leather using such iron tools. So, what was an important metal discovered during the later Vedic period? Gold, bronze, silver, or iron? The correct answer is iron. Now, let's talk about pottery. Well, you see, pottery also improved as the later Vedic people developed better clay molding skills. Take a look at this picture. Even here you can see such great pottery that people even in this day and age use. They really look like something from this period, right? Well, 4 new types of pottery was discovered during this period. These were black and red ware, northern black polished ware, painted grey ware, and red ware. From all of these, the most commonly used ones were these. These are the painted grey ware, right? And these were made in grey in color, that is why they were called painted grey ware. And apart from that, they also had such geometrical paintings using black paint. So even here you can take a look at this picture and you can see. Even here you can see such black lines that have been drawn on it, and these are actual pots that have been discovered. So we can understand better from that age. Apart from that, other type of pot that was discovered in the later Vedic period was northern black polished ware, which you can see here. You can even find handles in this one. So you can actually understand that pottery had evolved from early Vedic period to the later Vedic period. Now let's talk about later Vedic society, starting with the woman. If you remember, in the early Vedic period, women were very independent. They were allowed to go to all kinds of religious, be it political functions, and they were even allowed to choose their own husbands. But even during that time, the society was patriarchal, meaning that the men of the house took all the important decisions, and the houses and the households were headed by male members of the family, oldest male members of the family being father or grandfather. Similarly, during the later Vedic period, this thing continued. So the patriarchal family of the early Vedic age became even more strict and even male. So it became so strict that even male ancestors began to be worshipped by the family. So what do you think happened to the women? Well, their importance in the society decreased. Why? Well, because the male members were given so much importance, now position of women deteriorated. So they were now considered inferior to men, so below men, and apart from that they were now given subordinate or docile roles, because women were not considered strong at all, not as strong as men at least, right? So they were given subordinate or docile roles. Apart from that, they were no longer allowed to leave their houses for most functions, be it meetings, be it religious functions or sabha, samiti meetings. And then they were also not allowed to select their own husbands. Lastly, this was not all. Only upper caste women or upper class women could study. So the lower class women were no longer allowed to study. They were deprived of education. And lastly, they were only important for rituals and ceremonies. So society as a whole, we can see that women's importance in the society had decreased. But that's not all. Let's take a look at the whole society now. So in the Varna system, you must be remembering that during the early Vedic period, there was mobility. So a person could easily change their Varna according to their occupation or their function in the society, right? But what happened in the later Vedic society? That these roles were now hereditary and much more strict. So it was not flexible at all. So if you were born a Vaishya, you were going to stay a Vaishya. If you were born a Kshatriya, you will stay Kshatriya. You can no longer change your Varna, right? So during the later Vedic period, saw the rise of bitter rivalry between the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. Well, this happened because the Brahmins, the priests and scholars, were now important to the kings, right? They were conducting all sorts of rituals. So they were now financially rich too. Because of this, the Kshatriyas were not very happy, right? So because of this, they got into bitter rivalry, and there were a lot of fights between these two people, but they often compromised to exploit these two classes. So apart from this, what happened is that these Vaishyas, who were usually farmers, started to leave farming altogether. So these Vaishyas were usually farmers, but what happened that as society progressed forward, there was a lot of progress, right? So what happened is that people now needed newer things. Imagine you have a lot of money, so you will want to buy new clothes. Because of this, cloth making improved. Apart from that, you want to buy chariots. So now people are required to make chariots, right? So now there's demand for such things. So these Vaishyas, they decided that they were going to fulfill these demands. Another reason for these Vaishyas to leaving farming altogether was that a lot of Shudras were also now taking up farming or agriculture. So maybe their hatred for these Shudras led them into leaving farming altogether. Apart from that, now these Shudras were even more exploited. They were made to do menial tasks like sweeping, cleaning, even shoes making. So we can see that the society as a whole had taken a downward turn. Our parents today push us into becoming better humans, right? So even during the later Vedic period, these people had 4 different stages of life. Now let's learn about these stages. Well, the first stage was Brahmacarya stage. In this, you had to learn everything about the Vedas and be a student, right? Next stage was the Grihastha stage. In this stage, you had to live a married life and have a family. After this comes the difficult part, because it's the Vanaprastha stage. And in this, you have to go to the forest to meditate and lose ties with the loved ones slowly. But if this sounds hard, the next stage is far more tough, because it's the Sannyasa stage. And in this, you have to give up everything. You have to give up everything and retire permanently in the forest in the name of God. So this was the ideal way for a man during that time to lead his life. But what actually used to happen? Well, in reality, most people used to just stay at the Grihastha stage. So they used to get married and that's it. They did not follow then these stages, right? So with that, we can really understand how difficult this is and how difficult it is to achieve perfection, even in that day. So now today we all go to schools and attend classes, then we come back home or go to the hostels. But what about the people in later Vedic age? Well, they also had an education system. They had the Gurukul system of education, in which education was received while staying at the house of the guru or the teacher. So what happened then? Well, the higher class girls could attend such things from their houses. They did not have to go and live with their teacher. However, boys from the higher classes had to leave their houses and go live with their teachers after their thread ceremony or the Upanayana. Right? So this is the thread ceremony, after which these boys had to go and live with their teacher and learn about the Vedas. Well, there the teacher, he used to wake them up, then they all used to live together with the teacher's family. They had to maintain discipline. Even here you can see all the students listening to the teacher, paying attention, and even in the background you can see people fighting. Well, why can you see that? Well, because there were different subjects like we do today, right? So their subjects, they were taught literature, mathematics, grammar, architecture, astronomy, music, medicine, and even art of warfare and fighting, which you can see here, right? So this is how the teachers used to teach back in that day. And at the end, what were they teaching? Well, they were teaching everything about the Vedas. The Vedas were considered the most important knowledgeable books, and that is how the students were taught. And at the end of this teaching, the teacher was usually given a gift or a Guru Dakshina, right? So that is how the education system back then used to run. Now, it is important to understand that it was during this later Vedic period that these three Vedas came into existence. These were the Samaveda, the Yajurveda and Atharva Veda. These are the manuscripts which have been taken from each different Vedas, which were all composed during the later Vedic period, age being 1000 BCE till 600 BCE. Before this, from the early Vedic period, the Rig Veda was composed, right? So that makes it a total of 4 different Vedas that were composed during the Vedic age, and this is why this is called the Vedic age. So now let's try to do maths like the Aryans used to do back then. Well, if you have to multiply such a big number by 5, you will require a calculator, right? Well, not if you try Vedic maths. So how will you do that? Let's try that. First, write all the numbers like this. Right? So now you have to multiply that number by 5, right? So first what you have to do is that you have to divide each digit by 2. So 8 divided by 2 will be 4. Similarly, you have to do the rest and put a 0 at the end. Well, this way you get your final answer. Now let's try to multiply this number by 5. So what do? First you write down each digit individually and then you have to divide it, right? Then you have to divide each digit by 2. So 6, 8, 3, 8, 6. First you divide this particular digit by 2, which becomes 3. But there's a problem when you come to this digit, right? Because you can't divide this and get a whole number. So what do? Well, you put the value to the next one in the tens place for the next digit. So this becomes 18 instead of 8, and you divide 18 by 2. 18 divided by 2 is 9, and then this is how we get our final answer. Try it out at your home using a calculator and using today's modern mathematics way. I'm sure you'll find the answers to be the same. So as you already know, the importance of Brahmins increased, right? Importance of priests increased because of the rituals, right? So why do you think even in the lives of the common people, rituals were so dominant? Well, this is because the priests found that as rituals became more complex, they would receive more riches, and this is what they led the commoners into believing. So they told the commoners that they had all the spells and mantras to get all the wealth in the world, to make something better, to get rain. So this is how priests manipulated the people into believing that because of such complex and expensive rituals, their lives will be easier. So what happened during the later Vedic age? Well, during the later Vedic age, the complex and expensive rituals became a part of life, leading to prominence of the Brahmins in the society. So even though Brahmins were already so important during the early Vedic age, what happened that now They were even financially rich, and they were even more important, because without them these rituals, these lavish and complex rituals cannot be conducted. So this is how they gained importance. So we know that during the early Vedic age, people used to worship nature because they were really fascinated by what was going on. So they had gods like Agni, god of fire, Vayu, who is the god of wind, and Indra, the god of rain and king of gods. But what happened is that these gods lost their importance as we moved forward to the later Vedic age. During the later Vedic age, gods like Prajapati or Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer, was started to worship. So we can understand that the people of this later Vedic age had started to realize what religion truly was. And we also come to know that Hinduism, as we know today, started taking place or started becoming more prominent from that day and age. And even gods like Durga and Ganesh were worshipped back then. The other thing was that there was a god called Pushana who was the protector of cows, right? So he was usually worshipped by the upper classes during the early Vedic age. But what we see during the later Vedic age is that Pushana becomes the god for Shudras, because now they were looking after the cattle and the cows, right? So this way we can understand that during the later Vedic age, people really started understanding the whole concept of religion better. So now let's take a quick recap of the later Vedic age. Starting with the king. The Rajan was now more powerful, he was autonomous, and he was not accountable to the people. The people were not even there to select who the Rajan would be, because he was just too powerful now. Apart from that, the most important discovery which was made during this period was iron. Because of iron, what happened? Well, agriculture improved, all the different types of crafts such as leather making, chariots, everything improved. So iron really made their lives better, and we can see that in a sense Aryans had really found their gold. Apart from that, Brahmins and Kshatriyas were now more powerful. Why Brahmins? Because the kings used to ask them to conduct various different rituals. So in that way, Brahmins were more powerful, even financially rich, and Kshatriyas were more powerful because Kshatriyas were the kings and the warriors and the soldiers, right? So we can see that the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas were now more powerful. So what happened to the rest of the society? Well, the caste system was now rigid and hereditary. So one could not shift or change their caste, right? So because of this, the people who were already suffering, like the Shudras, could not get any more chance to make their lives better anymore. Apart from that, the importance of women also decreased in the society. Women were now less independent. They could no longer marry according to their choice. They were not allowed to attend meetings and religious gatherings. They were only important for rituals, and only rich class or higher classes women were allowed to study or educate, right? So we can understand the importance of women in this later Vedic age really decreased. There was also a change in gods, from earlier nature gods to later gods like Vishnu and Shiva and even Prajapati or Brahma. So we can understand that in totality, the society as a whole had taken a downward leap, and this was no longer an ideal place to live in. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free on DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app and get easy access to more than 5,000 amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million+ questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and get a chance to win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.